I have a very bold statement. I think Olivia Wilde's new film, Don't Worry, Darling, is actually pretty great on second viewing. Keywords being on second viewing. Don't Worry, Darling is a new psychological thriller starring Florence Pugh, Harry Styles, Chris Pine, Nick Kroll, some other relatively big names, but you've probably heard about it not because of the contents of the movie itself, but because of all the drama surrounding the movie over the last few weeks and months. But drama aside, critics and fans agreed, Don't Worry, Darling isn't great. Now, while the fans and critics do have valid concerns and criticisms, which we'll get into later in this video, after a second viewing of the film, it became clear to me that Don't Worry, Darling is a substantially better and more enjoyable movie on a rewatch. Similar to movies like The Sixth Sense, some stories just hit differently a second time. I should just say now, there will be spoilers throughout this whole video, so be warned. Now, let me just put this out there right at the start. There are blatant issues and plot holes and questions that go unanswered throughout this whole movie. That's a given. That's something that can't be fixed on a rewatch. And nobody should have to rewatch a movie more than once for it to still make sense and be coherent. So I'm not excusing that from the movie. But with all of that in mind, Don't Worry, Darling still has a lot of really fun Easter eggs, hidden meanings, and different things to pick up on every time you watch it. Let me explain. I'll give a quick synopsis of the plot for psychos out there like me who watch movie analysis videos without actually seeing the movie or don't plan on seeing the movie. So, set in the 1950s, the film introduces us to Alice, who's played by Florence Pugh, and Jack, who's played by Harry Styles. Originally supposed to be Shia LaBeouf. That whole fiasco is part of the drama, which you can Google if you want, but they're a couple that's blissfully in love, and they live in a town called Victory. This is an experimental company town that houses the men who work on a top secret project. While the husbands go to work on their mysterious project, the wives enjoy the beauty and harmony of their seemingly perfect community. And this facade of perfection is upheld for 987 days. Don't quote me on that exact number. I hope it's 987. I was taking notes while I was watching, but I'm in the theater where it's pitch black, so I can't see my page, and I'm trying to write while also trying to watch and process. So it was a quick line, and I don't know if I got it right, but I think it was 987 days. However, when glimpses of the dark truth behind the Victory Project begin to appear, Alice begins to question exactly what she's doing in Victory. I wanted to read that last line in kind of a dramatic tone because when I wrote it, I was like, that sounds way too dramatic, but it's a plot synopsis. That's what you get. All right, let's get the good out of the way first. Then we'll talk about the bad. And then we'll talk about why the movie is actually way better on a second viewing. Where Don't Worry, Darling shines is in its visuals and music. It has some really long, hypnotizing shots, and it's complemented super well by the chromatic Palm Springs-esque town that they're in. It actually is filmed in Palm Springs, and I could tell because my parents have a house down there. So the whole movie, I was like, oh, that looks really familiar. The use of mirrors and practical effects also do a great job of putting the viewer into the mindset of Alice. There's a couple different creepy mirror scenes, but the one that really stands out is when Margaret, a woman who is in a bit of a predicament, let's just say that, basically bashes her head into a mirror and it shatters, and it's this cool distortion effect. The film is also accompanied by a perfectly fitting and period appropriate soundtrack. There's surprisingly a lot to say about the soundtrack in regards to understanding the themes and what you pick up on with the music on second viewing, so we'll talk about that in a second. As with any great thriller, Don't Worry, Darling's premise is unique enough to keep the viewer engaged and keep us asking, like, what the fuck is actually going on here? And normally this is a really fun aspect of any story, as long as pieces of the puzzle are actually revealed to you periodically throughout the movie. Unfortunately, in the case of Don't Worry, Darling, Olivia Wilde waits until the last 30 to 40 minutes to give us any pieces to the puzzle, and as a result, we aren't given any meaningful answers to any of the hundreds of questions that we have throughout the movie. And by the time we do get some answers, it's unfortunately too little too late because there's not enough time for the story to connect all these loose ends. Florence Pugh, unsurprisingly, crushes it and upholds her standard as one of the best in the business. Her descent into madness alone is what will keep you engaged and what keeps this movie from being not good at all, I guess. It really does depend on her being fantastic, which she always is. And I believe Florence Pugh herself is the reason to give this movie a watch. I read a couple wild reviews claiming that she doesn't do anything like spectacular in this movie as an actress, and I'm just like, did we watch the same movie? So Florence Pugh is great, obviously, but But unfortunately, rather than receiving any substantial information on the lead antagonist of the film named Frank, we just get scene after scene after scene of Florence Pugh losing her mind and witnessing all these horrific things, which is fun to watch, don't get me wrong. Like I said, Florence Pugh does everything she can and she does fantastic, but Frank, played by Chris Pine, is one of the most interesting characters in the whole movie, and we just don't see him enough. Frank is the man who leads and seemingly created the Victory Project, which is the whole mystery behind the movie. And every time Frank is on screen, he steals the show. And I totally understand not wanting to take the glory away from Florence, but I really don't think it would have. I think if we got more Frank scenes spliced in throughout the movie, it would have helped so much with clarity and just basic understanding of where the movie's going. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let me rattle off a few events that happened in a row without ever learning any new information about the Victory Project. Near the start of the film, the first creepy event is that Alice notices a whole box of eggs is hollow. There's the scene in the trailer where she crushes an egg in her hand and there's nothing inside, and she found out the whole box was like that. Then she has her first unsettling vision, which is kind of like this weird daydream where she zones out and has some creepy vision in her head. Then she witnesses Margaret have this outburst at a party. Margaret is a pretty integral character to the conflict of the story. Then Alice is on a bus and witnesses a plane crash in the distance. Then she approaches this ominous building in the middle of the desert and then suddenly wakes up at home, having no idea how she got home. Then a wall in Alice's home collapses in on her, pushing her face up against a window. Then Margaret calls begging for help. Then Alice has her vision in the mirror of Margaret smashing her head through the mirror. Then Alice witnesses Margaret end it all. Then Jack, her husband, just gaslights the shit out of her. Then Alice has another vision / daydream where she just wakes up, like standing up next to her window with the lights on, like fully exposed to the neighborhood. Then it just keeps going, dude. It just gets fucking crazier. Then Alice uncontrollably wraps plastic wrap around her face as if she was possessed by someone else or something else. She just takes plastic wrap, just starts wrapping that shit. And finally, the 13th thing that happens before we learn any details about the Victory Project is that Dr. Collins then tries to sedate Alice and prescribe her pills, claiming that she has false memories. So that is 13 different events that take place over a large majority of the movie for like the first 2 acts. And for the most part, no real information is provided to us to start like filling in the gaps and understanding what's happening. It feels as if the film is saying, we have a bigger story to tell, but we'll get to that eventually. Now, for the rest of the video to make sense, and for my bold claim that Don't Worry Darling is actually pretty good on a rewatch to make sense, I have to spoil the twist at the end of the movie right now. We gotta at least get the twist out on the table so that everybody's on the same page here on what actually happened in the movie. So, we finally learn that Alice believes that she has to get the fuck out of Victory. She doesn't know exactly why, but she knows something's wrong. Margaret, who was one of her friends, she started kind of losing her mind. They painted her to be crazy, even though she wasn't. And Alice started seeing all the signs that there's some fucked up shit happening and I need to get out. But sadly for Alice, once she starts thinking this way and once the leaders realize that she's a threat to this whole operation, they drag her away, they torture her, and they essentially try to like reset her brain so that she doesn't really remember all these horrible things that have happened and why she should leave. So they do this sort of electrical torture thing where they just like shock her really fucking bad, and then they drop her back off at her home in Victory, and she's seemingly cured. But while Alice was being tortured, she had some visions of the real world, and that's when we kind of get the full story on what's actually happening here. And basically what we learn is that, oh god, this is a lot. How can I spark notes this? In real life, in the real world, Alice and Jack are dating and they live together in this apartment. Alice is a surgeon and works at a hospital. She works really long hours. Jack is basically this incel loser who doesn't take care of himself and sits at his computer all day. Jack, through this podcast hosted by Frank, learns about the Victory Project, which is basically a simulation where you pay to essentially like abduct your significant other or just a woman in general, and then you go lay down in bed and you live in this simulated world forever where everything's perfect and you're cool and everybody's happy and yeah, it's just like you're living in a simulation. I definitely didn't explain nearly enough details there, but that's the idea. So that's the gist of the reveal and the twist of what's actually going on. And between the reveal and the end of the movie, it's essentially just Alice trying to do everything she can to actually escape once and for all for real. So yeah, bada bing, bada boom. Alice does a few more things for 30 minutes or so, and eventually she gets out, and the movie cuts to black, and right after we hear Alice like gasp for air, like, and that's the end of it. A complaint that I see echoed by critics and fans alike is that all we ever learn about Frank is that he's a wealthy, well-respected leader of the Victory Project, and it's implied that he's also the creator of it, and that he hosts a popular podcast in the real world, which, fun little side tangent, according to Olivia Wilde, Frank as a character is inspired by Jordan Peterson, who she calls a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. See, the issue that a lot of people have with the movie, which I totally understand, is that when the ending of the movie relies on our understanding and believability of the world that the film has created, it's important that we understand who the antagonist of the film is and what their motivations are. With Frank, we get neither. Even just a few minutes of building Frank's character dispersed throughout the movie would have filled in a lot of the plot holes. And considering he stole the show every time he was on screen, I don't think anybody would have minded a few more Chris Pratt monologues. Fuck. Not Chris Pratt. Chris Pine. I'm also watching The Terminal List right now, so I'm getting them mixed up. The host of the movie podcast said, quote,
I love the mystery around the trailer too. It gives you more questions than answers. Now, when it comes to the movie, the same effect occurs, but it's not for the benefit of the film. I left with a lot more questions than I did with answers.
That's the general sentiment of a lot of people after first viewing. Now, oh baby, okay, here we go. This is what I learned and took away from the movie after second viewing. Most of Jack's strange actions and behaviors throughout the film are informed by the twists that we get at the very end of the movie. And as a result, so many different things connect on second viewing that originally just comes off as bad acting on first viewing. As I'm sure a lot of you might have seen, there was a lot of talk on social media about how Harry Styles' accent was trash and he should never act again because his acting performance was just so weird and all over the place. On August 24th, there was actually a clip from the movie that went viral.
Not everyone gets this opportunity. And if you keep talking like this, you're going to put it all at risk.
You're worried about a demotion? That's what you're worried about?
Our life. Alice, our life together.
And a lot of people started talking shit, saying that his accent changed twice over the course of the clip, and that Harry Styles, a British person, has like a worse British accent than non-British people, and that it doesn't even sound British, and that it's a weird mix of American and British and whatever. The people were talking a lot of shit about Harry, all right? But after the reveal, it all makes sense. All of it makes sense. So, after the reveal, we learn that Jack is actually an unemployed American incel that's pretending to be British inside the simulation, right? So Jack is this loser American guy that essentially abducted his girlfriend and is paying to live in the Victory Project where he can be anybody he wants. Everything is perfect. That's kind of the whole premise of the Victory Project for these guys that are paying to be there. So he's this American guy that's not confident, he's insecure, he's awkward, he's just the worst. So in the simulation, he wants to be a British guy, and there's actually lines that reference that. So it makes complete sense that his accent is gonna change from time to time, and that it's gonna be inconsistent, and that some of the way he says things are gonna sound weird, and they're gonna sound like maybe a mix of British and American. I found this quote from Chanel Vergas, who's a writer from Pop Sugar, and I'm gonna read it to you. For those paying close attention, the breaks in Jack's accent are actually hints at his regular speaking voice and the fact that Alice has more to question about her reality than she initially realized. Styles' delivery as Jack acts as a clue to the fragility of the world and adds an extra layer of nuance to the plot. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's why I didn't try to say it myself, but I'm reading all these negative reviews about his acting and his accent, and I'm like, guys, you gotta You gotta rewatch it. That's the point. And the same thing goes for his mannerisms throughout the movie. A lot of the scenes that people are talking about as bad acting, it's because he's an immature, self-conscious degenerate that is having to uphold this lie in front of everybody, especially his wife. On second viewing, you pick up on these details throughout the movie, and it's a fun little game because in the context of the ending, it all makes sense. Once again, I'm not excusing any of the plot holes or lack of Frank or lack of character development or whatever, but regardless, it is fun to go back and witness these little hints and pick up on these things. Just to give you an example of how my perspective changed from first to second viewing, there's a scene where Jack cooks dinner for Alice after she wakes up confused and disoriented, and on first viewing, the viewer is starting to get suspicious of Jack, but we still view this dinner scene as a clumsy, cute, and somewhat romantic attempt for Jack to cook dinner for his wife. He's clearly not great at cooking since he almost never does it, but at the very least, you get the feeling that Jack is doing the best he can to help out with dinner. Now, while he definitely does do some questionable things during this scene, like downplaying Alice's concerns and confusion as to what happened earlier in the day and how she got home, I personally still got the impression that what he was doing was cute, and although it was ineffective, he was trying to lift the mood and get her mind off of these things, blah, 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 blah. But on second viewing, this scene is totally different. Everything takes on a whole new meaning once you actually know the ending. On second viewing, this displayed Jack's immaturity and creepiness on a whole new level. He doesn't know how to cook dinner because he's a degenerate loser. And even in the real world, he has a line where he's like, I didn't cook dinner. Duh. So he doesn't know how to cook because he's a loser, not because he's like busy working hard all day. And he ignores all of Alice's valid concerns and confusion because he can't have her finding out the truth, not because he's trying to comfort her. If Alice were to find out the truth, that would compromise the entire operation. And as stated by Frank in the first act of the movie, the men ask their women for, quote,
discretion above all else.
All right, number 2. The second big change that I noticed on second viewing is that Bunny, who's Alice's neighbor and best friend, played by Olivia Wilde, has this subtle indifference towards everything unusual and weird that's happening in Victory. And on first viewing, you kind of notice these things, but subconsciously, at least for me, I thought like, oh, that's an interesting character choice that she like doesn't care that much, or she kind of rolls her eyes in a particular way, or just looks like disengaged, like she's kind of removing herself mentally from certain situations. But it wasn't until second viewing that you realize just how fucking dark her character actually is. So another twist near the end, once we get the grand reveal, is that Bunny has known the truth about the Victory Project the whole time. She signed up for it voluntarily and didn't tell any of the other women what was actually going on. She said that she chose the simulated life so that she could live with her little kids forever, so that she doesn't have to face the reality of losing her kids in real life. That's some fucked up shit. So she knew all the other women were prisoners and just gaslit them. I normally don't like that word because I feel like it loses its meaning, but there are multiple moments in this movie where it is full-blown gaslighting. On second viewing, you also notice that Bunny is the only character in the movie that smokes cigarettes, which is really interesting considering it's the 1950s and you would think more people would be lighting up. This also ties into Bunny's indifference while parenting. There's this one scene in particular where Alice greets Bunny's kids as they get off the school bus and it's like, oh, hey, what's up, you little cutie pies? And there's a specific close-up that I'm thinking of where Bunny looks away, takes a drag of her cigarette, and is just so mentally checked out and removed from it, either because she knows none of it's real and she doesn't have any real responsibility, or because she just needs a break from upholding this lie. And there are also many moments throughout the movie when Bunny tries to convince all the other women that Victory is perfect and that they don't need to leave and that they're overreacting about all these creepy things that are happening. Bunny is just the fucking worst. And on second viewing, I really felt like she is another villain in some way. Number 3, which might be my favorite, is that even the soundtrack has so many hidden meanings. In the first act of the film, we see all the men hop in their cars and leave together, seemingly going to work, and it's accompanied by a song called Comin' Home Baby by Mel Torme.
I'm coming home, baby, now. I'm coming home now, right away.
On first viewing, you might think this song is referring to the men coming home to their wives after a long day at work. However, it is much more evil than that. On a rewatch, you realize that the song is actually a double entendre. I can't believe I actually got to use that word in a video for once in my life. I never thought there would be a scenario when I could use the phrase double entendre and actually organically fit it into a sentence, but I did. So fuck you, mom. I'm kidding. I love my mom. The men are coming home in the sense that they're leaving the Victory Project to return to their real life home to make enough money to continue to pay for the Victory Project. And then later in the day, they're coming home back to their fake wives. Well, I guess they're real wives, but it's a fake world where they're coming home again. On second viewing, there's a lot more to take away from each song. And even on first viewing, I thought the soundtrack was banging. So the second time, you're like, oh, fuck. Although second viewing does clarify a lot of the plot holes in the movie, there are still quite a few answers that go absolutely unaddressed. Some of them being, what is Shelley's motive and backstory? Shelley is Frank's wife, and at the end of the movie, she stabs him, seemingly wanting to take over the Victory Project. But did she know the truth the whole time as well? What's the story there? We don't know hardly anything about her. If the Victory Project really has this top-notch security, which it seems to have, because they've been there for 987 days and it's still going, then why would Dr. Collins casually walk around with Margaret's file in like a green, I think it was green. I don't know for sure if it was green, but Margaret's file with all of her personal information and all the reality of what happened to her is just in this folder that says like top secret, and it's just blatantly right in the open when Dr. Collins visits Alice. That was just one of those things where you look at it and you're like, wow, how convenient that the doctor opened up his briefcase facing Alice. You see top secret in bold letters, and then he just happens to forget it. Like, it's either something stupidly convenient or Dr. Collins actually wanted to help Alice escape, but then that can't be true either, because then at the end, Dr. Collins tries to stop Alice from escaping and ends up dying because of it. What was the airplane crash even supposed to mean? It was definitely unsettling, but we never got any clarity on what it means or why it was part of the story. How will Frank's death impact the real world? How did Jack and Alice get out of work? Because Jack essentially kidnapped her for 3 years. How much of a pull did Frank have in the real world, and how did he run the Victory Project without any red flags? Oh my god. This might be the longest video I've ever made. As with any layered mystery or thriller story like Don't Worry Darling, there's gonna be a ton to pick up on every time you rewatch it, so I encourage you guys to go give it another watch, see if you enjoyed it more, because for me, I definitely had a better time the second viewing. And although my title is somewhat clickbait, because I don't think it's an amazing movie, but I do think it has quite a few redeeming qualities, and for someone like me who loves to analyze little details in the movies, I think it works pretty well, and it's definitely worth a watch. So there we go. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it took me literally a few hours to record this, so it's going to be a long editing process, so I would very much appreciate if you guys dropped a like, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the video and what you thought of Don't Worry Darling. I release a new video every week, so it would mean a lot to me if you guys subscribed and check out some of the other videos and stick around.